7 days after giving birth, my husband made me take the bus home in the freezing rain while he drove my Maybach to a family dinner. Standing on the curb with my newborn clutched to my chest, I pulled out my phone and made a single phone call to my father. Dad, it is time. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and I just experienced the ultimate betrayal from the man who swore to protect me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Seattle's autumn wind cut right through my thin wool coat as I stood outside the automatic doors of the maternity ward. I shifted my weight, biting the inside of my cheek as a sharp burning pain radiated from my fresh C-section incision. My 7-day-old son Leo was tucked safely against my chest, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm brewing around us. Bradley, my 35-year-old husband, stood just a few feet away. He was not checking to see if his wife and newborn son were warm enough. Instead, he was meticulously wiping an invisible speck of dust off the gleaming hood of a jet-black Maybach. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and checked his expensive watch, his face contorted into a mask of pure inconvenience. "Are you going to be much longer, Clara?" He sighed loudly, not even looking in my direction. "I have that celebration dinner with my mother and Kimberly tonight. Andre is flying in from Silicon Valley just for this, and I cannot be late." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer absurdity of his words. Andre, his African-American brother-in-law, who constantly bragged about his tech startups, was apparently more important than taking his wife and newborn child home from the hospital. "Bradley, I just had major surgery a week ago," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible, so I would not wake the baby. "Leo needs to get home, and I cannot stand out here in the cold much longer. Unlock the doors so we can get in." Bradley finally looked at me, his nose wrinkling in disgust as his eyes swept over my loose sweatpants and oversized sweater. He took a step back, shaking his head. "Actually, Clara, I think it is best if you find your own way back to the house." The sheer audacity of the statement paralyzed me. "What are you talking about?" "Look at yourself," he scoffed, crossing his arms. "You have not washed your hair in days. You smell like iodine sour milk and hospital cafeteria food. This Maybach has custom white Napa leather seats. I am not letting you ruin the interior with your hospital germs just before I have to drive my family to a 5-star restaurant." I tightened my grip on Leo. "You want me to find my own way home? With a 1-week-old baby? I am in pain, Bradley." He rolled his eyes dramatically, reaching into his designer wallet. He pulled out a worn plastic card and flicked it toward me. It landed on the wet concrete right next to my sneakers. "There is your transit card," he said dismissively. "The bus stop is only 2 blocks away. A little walking will be good for you anyway. You need to start losing that baby weight. Besides, it is not like you are contributing anything to this household right now. You are on unpaid maternity leave from your little logistics job. I am the one carrying the financial burden of this family. I am the vice president of tech innovations. I need to maintain an image. You riding in this car looking like a complete mess does not fit that image." He did not wait for a response. He turned his back on his wife, and his 1-week-old son slid into the driver's seat of the Maybach and started the engine. The powerful roar of the car echoed in the drop-off zone. He did not even look at me through the tinted window as he merged into the Seattle traffic, leaving me standing alone in the freezing drizzle. I looked down at the bus pass lying in a shallow puddle. Any normal woman might have broken down right there. She might have cried, screamed, or begged him to come back. But I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a cold, calculated calm washed over me, numbing the pain of my surgical wound. Bradley loved to talk about his money. He loved to flaunt his VP title, his expensive suits, and the luxurious lifestyle he thought he had built entirely on his own. His mother, Beverly, practically worshipped the ground he walked on, constantly reminding me how lucky I was that a successful man like Bradley settled for an ordinary logistics coordinator. His sister Kimberly and her husband Andre treated me like the hired help, constantly bragging about their own imaginary wealth while drinking my wine and eating my food. But there was a massive fatal flaw in Bradley's grand illusion of superiority. He was dead broke. The luxury suits he wore were bought on credit cards that were maxed to the limit. The tech innovations company where he held his precious vice president title was bleeding money. And that pristine jet black Maybach, he was so terrified of me ruining, it did not belong to him. It belonged to Apex Holdings, a private equity firm, and I, the woman he just discarded on the curb like trash, was the silent majority shareholder of that exact firm. For 3 years, I had played the role of the quiet, unassuming wife with a mediocre salary. My father, Richard, a self-made billionaire who preferred to stay entirely out of the public eye, had taught me from a young age that wealth attracts parasites. He told me to build a life on authenticity, to find someone who loved me, for me, not for my portfolio. I had kept my true identity a complete secret from Bradley and his toxic family, wanting to believe his vows were genuine. Today, he gave me his final answer. I carefully stepped over the bus pass, shifting Leo into one arm to protect him from the wind. With my free hand, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I bypassed my usual contacts and dialed a secure, unlisted number. The line connected almost instantly. Clara. My father's deep, authoritative voice came through the speaker. Are you all right? The hospital said you were being discharged today. I have a car waiting nearby if you need it. I am fine, Dad, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. But I need you to do something for me right now. Anything. Name it. The Maybach with the license plate ending in 8899. It is still registered under the corporate fleet management system. Correct. Yes, of course. All the company vehicles are fully integrated into our remote mainframe. Why? Because Bradley just drove off in it, leaving me and Leo at the hospital to take the bus, I replied calmly. He said I would ruin the leather. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The terrifying silence that followed was the sound of a fiercely protective father realizing his daughter had been deeply wronged. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was absolute ice. Give me the word, Clara. Initiate the remote override protocol. I instructed, watching the rain begin to fall harder against the pavement. Cut the engine power, lock the transmission, and disable the ignition system completely. I want that car dead in the water. Consider it done, my father said. Do you want me to send the legal team in now? Not yet. I smiled, feeling the thrill of the impending destruction settle into my bones. Let them enjoy their dinner tonight. Let them think they have won. The asset recovery plan begins tomorrow, and I'm going to strip them down to absolutely nothing. The Seattle rain felt like shards of glass against my skin as I stepped off the city bus. I kept my coat wrapped tightly around Leo, shielding his fragile newborn frame from the bitter wind. Every step toward the house sent a sharp jolt of pain through my healing surgical incision. Bradley had taken the car, leaving me to navigate a grueling mile-long walk from the bus stop in the freezing downpour. The physical agony was intense, but nothing compared to the cold realization of exactly who I had married. I unlocked the front door, expecting the quiet sanctuary of my home. Instead, I was instantly hit by the overwhelming scent of cheap floral perfume and loud grating laughter echoing from the upper floor. The entryway was cluttered with expensive designer luggage and bulky boxes. High heels and muddy loafers were kicked off carelessly onto the imported Turkish rug I had paid for myself. I clutched Leo closer and hurried up the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I headed straight for the nursery. I had spent countless months decorating that room with soft sage green walls, a handcrafted wooden crib, and a vintage rocking chair where I planned to hold my son. I pushed the door open and froze. The crib was gone. The rocking chair was gone. Standing in the center of the room was Kimberly Bradley's entitled sister, dictating arrogant orders to a bewildered handyman. Down the hall, Beverly, my domineering mother-in-law, was directing two burly movers carrying my mahogany dresser out of the master suite. What exactly is going on here? I demanded, my voice cutting sharply through the noise. Beverly turned around. She smoothed down her silk blouse and offered me a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. Clara. Good you finally made it, Beverly said dismissively, ignoring her newborn grandson shivering in my arms. We are making some necessary adjustments to the living situation. Bradley has his final evaluation for the CEO position coming up. He cannot possibly perform at his peak with a screaming infant keeping him awake. You dismantled my son's nursery while I was giving birth, I said, struggling to comprehend the sheer entitlement. Kimberly scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. It is going to be my new glam room. Andre and I are moving in permanently, and Mom is taking the master suite so she can help Bradley manage his executive stress. You and the baby can take the small guest room by the laundry area. It makes perfect sense since you will be doing the household chores. I took a slow, steady breath. The guest room was a cramped box with zero insulation. You are kicking me out of my own bedroom, I stated flatly. Your bedroom? Beverly laughed loudly, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed off the hardwood floors. Do not flatter yourself, Clara. My son works 80 hours a week to afford this gorgeous house. He is a vice president. You are a low-level logistics coordinator currently on unpaid leave. You contribute absolutely nothing financially. You should be thanking God that my successful son allows a freeloader like you to live in such a beautiful home. Beverly's cruel words were explicitly designed to humiliate me. She loved reminding me that I was merely a charity case elevated solely by her brilliant son's generosity. She had absolutely no idea that her brilliant son had secretly defaulted on the mortgage 6 months ago to fund his reckless gambling. She did not know that the bank had sent foreclosure notices directly to this address. And she certainly did not know that I had swooped in and bought the entire property in cash through Apex Holdings, a blind LLC that I owned 100%. Bradley was not the king of this castle. He was barely a tolerated guest, and Beverly was currently trespassing on my personal property. Before I could tell her exactly who owned the floor she was standing on, heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Andre Kimberly's husband swaggered into the hallway. Andre loved to play the part of the visionary Silicon Valley founder. He spent his days pitching imaginary tech startups to anyone who would listen, living entirely off the money he constantly begged and borrowed from Bradley. He walked straight up to Kimberly and spun a silver keychain around his index finger. The polished metal caught the hallway light, and I instantly recognized the heavy, distinctive emblem attached to the ring. They were the keys to the Maybach. Check it out, babe. Andre grinned widely. Bradley just handed them over to me. He said a guy with a multi-million-dollar startup cannot be seen driving around the city in a leased sedan. He gave me the Maybach for my investor meetings indefinitely. Kimberly squealed in delight, clapping her hands together. Oh my gosh, Andre, that is amazing news. See, Clara, this is what real family does. We support each other's incredible success. Beverly nodded approvingly. You need to look the part to get the massive funding you deserve, Andre. Bradley is such a generous and supportive brother. He truly understands how wealth and power work. I looked at the three of them, celebrating their stolen luxury. Bradley had abandoned his wife and newborn child in the freezing rain to protect the pristine leather seats of that car, only to hand the keys directly over to a man who had not worked a legitimate job in 5 years. They stood there, reveling in my perceived humiliation, fully believing they had broken my spirit and cemented my permanent place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just held Leo tighter against my chest, turned my back on them, and walked quietly down the hall toward the cramped guest room. Let them enjoy the shiny keys. They were about to find out exactly who controlled the engine. Andre tossed the heavy silver keys into the air and caught them with a loud smack of his palm. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the damp rain patches on my oversized sweater and the dark circles under my eyes. He laughed, a booming, arrogant sound that made Leo stir against my chest. Bradley told us you let yourself go, but wow, Andre sneered, shaking his head in mock pity. You look like something the cat dragged in and refused to eat. No wonder he needed a night out with real executives. A guy running a massive tech startup like me understands the pressure Bradley is under. He needs a wife who looks like an asset, not a liability. I did not scream. I did not throw the nearby decorative vase at his head, even though my hands twitched with the urge to do so. Kimberly chimed in from the sofa, agreeing with her husband, telling me I should put on some makeup if I wanted to keep a successful man like my husband interested. Beverly simply sipped her wine, watching me with a smug expression of total victory. I held Leo closer, turning my back on their cruel laughter, and walked down the narrow, drafty hallway to the guest room next to the laundry area. The room was freezing. The air vent was completely blocked by stacked boxes of Kimberly's out-of-season clothes. I laid Leo gently on the cramped twin bed, wrapping him in my own dry wool coat to keep him warm. I locked the door behind me, the mechanical click sounding incredibly loud in the small space. I reached into my hidden duffel bag and pulled out my encrypted laptop. The heavy black casing looked entirely out of place in the dusty room. I booted it up, entered my biometric passcode, and opened a secure communication channel to my father's lead corporate attorney, Marcus. The connection established instantly. Clara Marcus's voice came through the encrypted line, crisp and entirely professional. Your father briefed me on the situation at the hospital. We are ready to initiate the full asset reclamation protocol whenever you give the green light. Not the full reclamation yet, Marcus, I whispered, keeping my eye on the locked door. I need a status check on the corporate structure for Tech Innovations. Marcus typed rapidly on his end. Tech Innovations is currently operating as a Tier 3 subsidiary of Apex Holdings. You are the sole owner of Apex Holdings, Clara. You technically employ Bradley and his entire executive board. We also show that the company vehicle, the Maybach, currently registered to Bradley's department, is directly owned by your holding company. I smiled, a tight, humorless line in the dark room. Bradley loved to brag about his company car, acting as if his sheer genius had earned him the ultimate corporate perk. He had no idea that I signed the authorization for that fleet of vehicles 3 years ago. I buried my signature under layers of corporate anonymity, just to see if he could handle success without turning into a monster. He failed the test completely. He was a mid-level manager playing dress-up with my money. Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold. I need to access the fleet management mainframe. Transfer the administrative controls to my terminal. Transferring now, Marcus replied. A green command window popped up on my screen. I typed in my master credentials. The system displayed the exact GPS location of the Maybach currently parked in my own driveway. Bradley had handed the keys to Andre, a man who contributed nothing but hot air and stolen oxygen to this world. Andre thought he was going to drive my car to his fake startup meetings and pretend he was a titan of industry while I shivered in a laundry room. I highlighted the engine control module on the screen. Marcus, lock the transmission and disable the fuel injection system. I want the vehicle immobilized completely. Make sure the onboard computer registers it as a catastrophic system failure that requires a master reset from the holding company. Done. Marcus confirmed, the sound of his keystrokes echoing softly. The car is now a 3-ton paperweight. Nobody is driving it anywhere. I thanked Marcus and closed the laptop. The satisfying click of the screen shutting matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I climbed into the small twin bed next to Leo, pulling the thin blankets up around us. The pain from my incision throbbed, but my mind was perfectly clear. For the first time since my water broke, I slept peacefully, knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. Morning arrived with the violent sound of wood splintering. I jolted awake as the guest room door crashed open, hitting the drywall with a deafening bang. Leo started screaming instantly, his tiny fists waving in the air. Andre stood in the doorway, his face purple with absolute rage. He was fully dressed in a cheap imitation designer suit, gripping the Maybach keys so hard his knuckles were stark white. "What did you do?" Andre roared, taking a threatening step into the tiny room. "I know you did something to the car. I have a meeting with angel investors in 20 minutes, and the engine is completely dead. You broke it because you are a jealous, spiteful loser, and you want to ruin my success." Andre stood over my small bed, his face twisted with a rage that seemed entirely out of proportion for a dead car battery. Before I could even sit up and shield Leo from his shouting, Bradley shoved his way past Andre and stepped into the cramped guest room. My husband was already dressed in a sharp navy suit, adjusting his silk tie with an air of complete superiority. He did not look at his newborn son, who was now wailing in my arms. He looked only at me, his eyes cold and full of accusation. "What is wrong with you, Clara?" Bradley demanded, his voice dropping into that quiet, menacing tone he always used when he wanted to make me feel small. Andre told me the Maybach is completely unresponsive. It was running perfectly fine when I drove it home last night. You were the only one left alone with it this morning when you went out to grab the diaper bag from the trunk. You could not handle the fact that I gave the car to a real entrepreneur, so you threw a petty tantrum and tampered with the engine. I sat up slowly, rocking Leo against my chest. I did not touch the engine, Bradley. I do not even know how to open the hood of that car. "Do not lie to me," Bradley snapped, pulling a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. He threw it onto the thin blanket covering my lap. I already had my personal mechanic come out and run a diagnostic. The entire central computer system is fried. It is a catastrophic electrical failure, and it was clearly caused by someone messing with the override console. I looked down at the piece of paper. It was an invoice from a company called Apex Auto Restoration detailing a complete engine control module replacement. The total at the bottom was exactly $15,000. "You are going to pay for this," Bradley stated, crossing his arms. "I am not letting your negative, spiteful energy derail my family." Andre has a massive pitch meeting today that could secure millions in funding. He needs that car to project success. You are going to drain that meager personal savings account you have been hoarding and cover this repair cost right now. I stared at the invoice. The audacity of the demand was staggering, but the pattern was entirely familiar. For 3 years, Bradley had systematically drained every dollar of my modest logistics salary. When Beverly decided she simply had to join the elite Oakwood Country Club, Bradley demanded I empty my holiday bonus fund to cover her initiation fee, claiming it was an investment in his corporate networking. When Kimberly demanded a lavish destination bachelorette party in Cabo, Bradley forced me to liquidate my emergency savings, telling me that supporting his sister was my duty as a wife. He loved portraying himself as the wealthy provider, while quietly bleeding me dry to fund his family's extravagant delusions. And now, while I was on unpaid maternity leave recovering from major surgery, he was demanding $15,000 for a car that was not actually broken. I looked up at Bradley. "You want me to give you everything I have left in my savings to fix a car that you just gave away to your brother-in-law? You owe this family," Beverly called out from the hallway, stepping into view with a cup of coffee in her hand. "You are living in a luxury home, rent-free, eating our food, and bringing nothing but a crying baby into Bradley's peaceful environment. Paying for this repair is the absolute least you can do to earn your keep." Kimberly peered over her mother's shoulder, a nasty smirk on her face. "Do not be so stingy, Clara. Andre's startup is going to make us all rich anyway. Consider it an investment." I looked at the four of them standing together, a united front of manipulation and greed. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was a terrified, dependent woman who would do anything to keep the peace in her marriage. I reached over to the small nightstand, picked up my checkbook, and clicked a pen. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "If the mechanic says it costs $15,000, then I will pay it. I just want this issue resolved so Leo and I can get some rest." I wrote out the check for $15,000, making it payable to Bradley as he requested, and handed it over. Bradley snatched the check from my fingers with a triumphant smirk. He inspected the amount, folded it neatly, and slid it into his pocket. "See that you do not try any more of your little stunts, Clara," he warned condescendingly. "If you behave yourself and stay out of our way, maybe I will let you move back into the master bedroom by the holidays." He turned and walked out, clapping Andre on the shoulder. "Come on, man, I will drop you off at your meeting in my leased sedan for today. We will have the Maybach running for you by tomorrow." The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the freezing guest room. The heavy silence fell over the house as the front door closed downstairs. As soon as I heard Bradley's car pull out of the driveway, I set Leo down in his makeshift bed, grabbed my laptop, and opened the banking application. I watched my personal account balance. Within 20 minutes, the $15,000 check cleared. Bradley had used a mobile deposit app. I opened a secure financial tracking software I used for Apex Holdings. Bradley was an employee of my subsidiary, which meant his primary bank accounts were tied to the corporate payroll system. It took me less than 2 minutes to trace the exact route of my $15,000. The money did not go to a mechanic. It did not go to an auto shop in Seattle. Bradley had transferred the funds directly into a secondary account. From there, the money was instantly wired out. I traced the routing number across international lines, watching the digital footprint move with clinical precision. The final destination was a private offshore account located in the Cayman Islands. I pulled the registration details for the offshore account. The screen blinked, revealing the registered owner. It was not a tech startup. It was not a group of angel investors. The offshore account was registered exclusively to Andre. I leaned back against the cold wall, staring at the glowing screen. Andre was not running a tech company. He was not meeting with venture capitalists. The entire startup was a phantom entity, a hollow shell designed for one specific purpose. Andre was running a massive financial grift, and my husband was blindly handing him thousands of dollars of stolen money. The trap was already set, and they had just handed me the match to burn their entire lives to the ground. The revelation that Andre was operating a phantom shell company in the Cayman Islands was the loose thread that unraveled Bradley's entire carefully curated existence. Sitting in the freezing guest room with my sleeping son, I kept the secure connection to Apex Holdings open. If Bradley was willing to blindly funnel my $15,000 into Andre's offshore grift, I needed to know exactly how much damage he had done to the accounts that actually belonged to us. I opened a new tab and bypassed the two-factor authentication for our primary joint savings account. This was the account we established when we first got married. It was meant to be our safety net, the foundation for our future, and most recently, the start of Leo's college fund. I had consistently deposited 30% of my paycheck into it for years. The screen loaded and my blood ran ice cold. The balance was a fraction of what it should be. I pulled up the transaction history and scrolled through the past 8 months. There were dozens of wire transfers escalating in size. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. A massive lump sum of 50,000 just 3 weeks before I went into labor. In total, exactly $150,000 had been drained from the account. Bradley had systematically wiped out my son's future. A dark, searing anger ignited in my chest, burning away the last remnants of the exhausted, accommodating wife I had been trying to play. I closed the laptop, my hands perfectly steady. There would be no screaming. There would be no hysterical tears. They wanted to play games with my money, my home, and my child's security. It was time to let them put all their cards on the table. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I put on a tailored emerald green sweater, pinned my hair back, and carried Leo downstairs. The kitchen smelled of expensive roasted coffee and artisan pastries. Beverly, Kimberly, Andre, and Bradley were gathered around my marble kitchen island, laughing loudly. Andre was holding court, waving a half-eaten croissant in the air while describing a completely fabricated meeting with a venture capital firm. Kimberly was gazing at him with absolute adoration, while Beverly nodded along, completely enthralled by her son-in-law's imaginary success. Bradley sat at the head of the island, sipping his espresso, looking like the proud patriarch of a thriving dynasty. The laughter died instantly when I walked into the room. Beverly rolled her eyes heavily, setting her coffee mug down on the marble counter. "I hope you are not bringing that crying child in here to disrupt our breakfast," Clara Beverly snapped. "Bradley has a massive day ahead of him and needs a calm environment." I ignored her entirely and walked straight up to the island, stopping directly across from my husband. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Where is the $150,000, Bradley?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Bradley's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. His hand gripped his espresso cup a little too tightly, his knuckles turning white. But he was a practiced liar. He quickly recovered, schooling his features into a mask of arrogant annoyance. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he said dismissively, refusing to break eye contact. "Do not play stupid," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. I checked our joint savings account this morning. The account for Leo's future. It has been completely gutted over the past 8 months. $150,000 is gone. Where did you send it? Kimberly let out a loud theatrical sigh, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Oh my gosh, Clara, do you ever stop whining about money? You are so incredibly small-minded. Bradley leaned back in his leather barstool, crossing his arms. He put on his best condescending smile. If you must know, since you clearly lack the capacity to understand high-level wealth management, I moved that money into a high-yield growth vehicle. Angel invested it into Andre's tech startup. Andre sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. That is right. Bradley is my lead seed investor. He got in on the ground floor. I stared at Bradley, feigning complete shock. You took our life savings and handed it to Andre without asking me. Kimberly slammed her hand down on the counter. Why would he ask you, Clara? You are a glorified warehouse clerk. You have zero vision. Andre is going to be the next tech billionaire. His software platform is going to revolutionize the global logistics market. Bradley was smart enough to see the potential, and he invested family capital to ensure we all secure generational wealth. You should be down on your knees thanking my brother for securing your financial future instead of standing here acting like a pessimistic, ungrateful shrew. Beverly chimed in, pointing a manicured finger at me. This is exactly why Bradley handles the finances. You panic over every penny. You have a poverty mindset, Clara. Bradley is building an empire alongside Andre, and you are worried about a meager savings account. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family's ambition. I let them talk. I let them build their towering monument of lies and insults right in front of me. I looked at Bradley, who was smirking, clearly proud of how quickly his mother and sister had rushed to defend his brilliant financial acumen. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed I was stupid enough to accept that he had handed our child's college fund over to his lazy brother-in-law. As Kimberly continued her rant about Andre's visionary genius, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a secure message from Marcus. I had instructed his private investigation team to run a forensic trace on the $150,000 the moment I discovered it missing. They were significantly faster than I anticipated. I tapped the screen, opening the encrypted file Marcus had just sent. While Kimberly yelled about generational wealth and Bradley sat there playing the genius investor, I read the official bank routing documents. Bradley had not sent a single dime of that $150,000 to Andre. The money had bypassed Andre's offshore shell company entirely. Instead, the funds had been wired directly to an elite real estate brokerage firm right here in downtown Seattle. The attached document was a finalized property deed. Bradley had used our life savings to pay the cash down payment on a $2 million luxury penthouse condo. I scrolled down to the bottom of the deed, looking for the registered owner. The property was not in Bradley's name. It was not in a corporate LLC. The luxury downtown penthouse was registered exclusively in the name of Chloe Vance, a 24-year-old junior marketing assistant who worked directly under Bradley at Apex Holdings. I looked up from my phone. Bradley was currently taking a relaxed sip of his coffee, nodding along, as Andre babbled about synthetic software solutions. My husband had not just stolen our future. He had used it to buy a luxury love nest for a woman 10 years his junior. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. They wanted to talk about investments. I was about to show them exactly what a hostile takeover looked like. I pocketed my phone, letting the screen go black, and offered Bradley a smile that was entirely hollow. Let him believe his lie was bulletproof. Let Kimberly and Beverly revel in their delusions of grandeur. I had the deed, I had the truth, and I had the power to detonate their lives whenever I chose. But a simple confrontation over breakfast was too small a stage for the reckoning they deserved. 3 days later, the opportunity for a much grander stage presented itself. I was in the kitchen carefully measuring formula for Leo when Beverly marched in and slapped a thick stack of ivory cardstock onto the marble counter. You are hosting a dinner party tomorrow night, Beverly announced, her tone leaving zero room for debate. 30 of Bradley's top corporate colleagues and board members will be arriving at 7 sharp. His promotion to CEO is practically guaranteed, but this dinner is the final push to secure their absolute loyalty. You will prepare a 5-course meal, you will ensure the house is spotless, and you will stay out of the way once the actual business discussions begin. We cannot have your post-pregnancy gloom ruining the celebratory atmosphere. I glanced at the guest list. I recognized every single name. They were the Executive Board of Tech Innovations, which meant they were on paper my direct subordinates. I will handle it, I replied smoothly. The following evening, the house was immaculate. The catering, which I had quietly ordered and plated to look homemade to avoid Beverly's micromanagement, was arranged perfectly in the dining room. As the executives began to arrive, I played the role of the quiet, unassuming wife perfectly. I took their coats, offered them champagne, and listened as they loudly discussed their corporate conquests, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman handing them napkins owned the very company they were bragging about. At 7:15, the heavy oak front door swung open. Bradley made his grand entrance. He was practically vibrating with arrogance, wearing a bespoke tuxedo that screamed fresh money. But he was not alone. Clinging tightly to his arm was a woman who looked like she had just stepped off a runway. She was tall, striking, and poured into a crimson silk dress that left nothing to the imagination. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her diamonds caught the light of the entryway chandelier. Bradley guided her directly into the center of the foyer, commanding the attention of every executive in the room. Gentleman Bradley announced, his voice booming over the soft background music. I want to introduce you all to Sydney. She is a vital new strategic partner consulting on our upcoming West Coast expansion. Her insights are going to be instrumental to our new direction. A chorus of appreciative murmurs and eager handshakes erupted from the men. I stood near the archway holding a tray of crystal glasses, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. Sydney. The name echoed in my mind. She was not just a consultant. The way Bradley's hand lingered on the small of her back, the proprietary way she leaned into his personal space, it was obvious. This was the woman from the offshore accounts, the woman he had bought a $2 million condo for, parading right into my home under the guise of corporate strategy. Sydney locked eyes with me through the crowd. She whispered something into Bradley's ear, gave him a playful tap on the chest, and gracefully detached herself from his side. She glided across the room, stopping directly in front of me. She did not offer her hand. Instead, her gaze slowly raked over my body, starting from my sensible black flats, lingering on the loose, comfortable dress I wore to hide my surgical wrap, and finishing at my tired face. You must be Clara, Sydney said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Bradley told me so much about you. It is so brave of you to host a party in your condition. My condition is called having a baby 3 weeks ago, I replied, my tone deliberately polite. Sydney offered a small, pitying sigh. Of course. Motherhood is just so draining, is it not? It completely consumes some women. Bradley mentioned you have been struggling to keep up with his pace lately. That is exactly why I am here. He needs someone with the energy and the aesthetic to match his new executive profile. Someone who understands high-level strategy and does not drag him down with domestic complaints. I told him I would be more than happy to step in and handle the heavy lifting for his corporate image. You can just focus on your little domestic duties. The sheer audacity of her insult was breathtaking. She was standing in the house I bought, drinking the champagne I paid for, and subtly telling me she was replacing me. Her words were a perfect, polished mirror of the exact emotional abuse Beverly and Kimberly had inflicted on me for years. They all viewed me as a useless, frumpy obstacle standing in the way of Bradley's greatness. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my lack of flashy designer clothes meant I lacked power. I did not flinch. I did not throw my tray of glasses at her perfectly contoured face. I simply offered her a chillingly serene smile. I am sure your contributions to Bradley's career will be thoroughly documented. Sydney, I said, my voice smooth as glass. Excuse me. The appetizers need my immediate attention. I turned on my heel and walked calmly through the swinging doors into the kitchen, letting them close securely behind me. The sounds of the party instantly muffled into a low, indistinct hum. I set the tray down on the stainless steel prep island and pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket. Bradley wanted to bring his mistress into my home and parade her around as a strategic partner. He wanted to use my company's resources to fund his infidelity and humiliate me in front of my own employees. I opened the secure corporate portal for Apex Holdings. I bypassed the standard employee directories and logged directly into the executive financial mainframe. I navigated to Bradley's specific corporate profile. If Sydney was officially on the books as a strategic consultant, there would be a paper trail. I wanted to see exactly how much company capital he was funneling into her accounts, her expenses, and her supposedly brilliant consulting fees. My thumb hovered over the screen. I selected the master command prompt and initiated a full unredacted Level 1 forensic audit on every single corporate account expense report, an authorized vendor contract tied to Bradley's name. The loading icon spun, digging deep into the digital vaults of his entire professional existence. The loading icon on my encrypted phone finally vanished, replaced by a dense cascading spreadsheet of corporate financial data. The Level 1 forensic audit had successfully breached the firewall of Bradley's executive accounts. I leaned against the cool stainless steel of the kitchen prep island, my eyes scanning the glaring red numbers, highlighting years of systematic, unchecked embezzlement. It was infinitely worse than just the downtown penthouse. Bradley had authorized a monthly retainer of $25,000 to Sydney's Phantom consulting firm. He had expensed luxury international vacations, high-end jewelry, and a fleet of leased sports cars directly to the corporate treasury of Tech Innovations. He had classified every single stolen dollar under the guise of client acquisition and strategic market expansion. He had treated my company like his own personal piggy bank to fund his double life, fully believing his managerial position made him completely untouchable. Before I could lock my screen and process the sheer volume of his theft, the heavy swinging door of the kitchen was violently pushed open. Beverly marched in, her face flushed with expensive wine and pure arrogance. She carried a towering, precarious stack of dirty porcelain appetizer plates left over from the first course. The moment the door swung shut behind her, the charming, sophisticated mask she wore for the corporate guests vanished entirely. "Wash these immediately," Beverly commanded, shoving the heavy stack of dirty plates directly at my chest. I had to drop my phone onto the marble counter and throw my hands up just to catch the porcelain before it shattered across the floor. Leftover truffle sauce and greasy crumbs smeared across the front of my clean clothes. "And once you finish scrubbing those," Beverly continued, pointing a sharp, manicured finger at the sink, "you need to stay in here out of sight for the remainder of the evening. We are moving into the crucial phase of the dinner, where the board members will formally discuss Bradley's promotion to CEO. We absolutely cannot have you wandering around the dining room looking like a depressed, exhausted maid. It completely ruins the elite atmosphere we are trying to cultivate." I tightened my grip on the edges of the dirty plates, feeling the cold porcelain digging into my palms. "You want me to hide in the kitchen like a servant during a dinner party in my own home?" "It is not your dinner party, Clara," Beverly scoffed, rolling her eyes as she leaned against the counter. "It is an executive function, and you simply do not fit the aesthetic. You never have. Look at you. You are wearing a shapeless, boring dress, you have zero natural charisma, and you completely lack the polished grace required to stand beside a titan of industry. Sydney, on the other hand, is an absolute revelation." Beverly took a slow sip from her wine glass, her eyes gleaming with vindictive malice. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to make sure I knew exactly how little I meant to this family. "Sydney comes from the right background," Beverly stated proudly. "She understands how to navigate rooms filled with real power and unimaginable wealth. Bradley realized months ago that you were nothing but a temporary placeholder. You gave us a healthy grandson, which is fine, but you are completely ill-equipped for the magnificent life Bradley is building. Sydney is his true strategic partner. She brings actual value, beauty, and status to this family. You just drain our resources with your constant negativity. It is time for you to accept your place." The sheer, unfiltered delusion of her monologue was almost intoxicating. Beverly was standing inside a multi-million-dollar property that I owned free and clear. She was drinking imported wine bought with my money. She was praising a woman who was actively helping her son embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from my corporation. They were all so completely blinded by their own greed and unearned superiority that they could not see the cliff edge rapidly approaching. I looked from Beverly's smug, triumphant face down to the encrypted phone resting on the counter. The forensic audit report was perfectly compiled, formatted into a neat, undeniable digital document. It detailed every stolen dollar, every fraudulent consulting fee, and the direct, unassailable link between Bradley's corporate account and Sydney's offshore shell companies. I did not argue with my mother-in-law. I did not defend my postpartum body, my choice of clothing, or my worth as a wife. I did not waste my breath trying to explain reality to a woman entirely divorced from it. I simply walked over to the deep stainless steel basin. I held the heavy stack of expensive porcelain plates out over the empty sink. I loosened my grip entirely and let them fall. The deafening crash echoed through the large kitchen like a gunshot. Shards of white porcelain and smeared food exploded outward, violently clattering against the metal basin and scattering across the pristine floor. Beverly violently jumped back, clutching her chest as her mouth fell open in absolute horror. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, staring wide-eyed at the broken, ruined mess in the sink. "Those plates cost an absolute fortune. You clumsy, spiteful, ungrateful brat." I completely ignored her screaming. I calmly picked up my phone, wiping a stray smudge of appetizer sauce off the screen with my thumb. I opened my secure administrative email client and attached the massive forensic audit file. I populated the recipient list with the direct private email addresses of every single Tech Innovations board member currently sitting in my formal dining room. I also added Bradley's corporate email, Sydney's consulting address, and the company's internal legal department. In the subject line, I typed 3 simple words: Bradley Wilson fraud. I looked up at Beverly, offering her a bright, entirely genuine smile. "Do not worry about the broken plates, Beverly," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "They belong to me just like absolutely everything else in this house." I tapped the send button. The screen flashed green, confirming the encrypted message had been successfully delivered to 30 high-level executives simultaneously. For 3 long, agonizing seconds, the only sound in the kitchen was Beverly's outraged, heavy breathing as she stared at me with pure venom. Then, from the formal dining room, just on the other side of the swinging wooden doors, a chorus of simultaneous notification chimes erupted. 30 corporate cell phones pinged in perfect unison. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly fell over the lively dinner party. A moment later, a collective echoing gasp sucked all the air out of the house. The collective gasp from the dining room hung in the heavy air of the house, sharp and undeniable. Beverly was still frozen by the kitchen sink, her mouth opening and closing in soundless outrage as she stared at the shattered pieces of her precious porcelain scattered across the floor. I did not give her a second glance. I stepped carefully around the jagged white shards, pushed open the heavy wooden swinging doors, and stepped back into the dining room to watch the fallout. The scene before me was a masterpiece of sudden, absolute corporate panic. 30 top-tier executives were standing in total silence, staring down at their glowing phone screens. Some were scrolling frantically, their thumbs moving in rapid, jerky motions. Others were exchanging wide-eyed looks of sheer horror with their colleagues across the room. The atmosphere had shifted from a celebratory cocktail hour to the tense, breathless quiet of a bomb squad analyzing an active explosive. The only person in the entire house who was completely oblivious to the digital detonation I had just unleashed was Bradley. My husband was standing near the grand entryway, his back to the dining room, motioning grandly for a uniformed courier to step forward. Bradley had arranged for a specialized delivery of vintage Bordeaux to arrive precisely at this moment. It was a $10,000 flex, an extravagant, highly choreographed performance meant to solidify his image as a man of refined tastes and limitless resources in front of the board. "Bring it right in," Bradley ordered loudly, projecting his voice so the silent executives behind him would be sure to hear. "We only serve the absolute best for the leadership team." The courier stepped inside, carefully holding a handcrafted wooden crate bearing the insignia of an exclusive French vineyard. He set the crate down on the entryway table and pulled out a digital payment terminal. The total comes to $10,400, sir, the courier said politely. Bradley offered a smug, self-satisfied smirk to the room at large. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke tuxedo jacket and pulled out his heavy black corporate card. He tapped it against the courier's terminal with a flourish. The machine processed for a moment, then let out a sharp negative beep. The courier frowned, looking down at the screen. "I am sorry, sir. It says declined." Bradley let out a forced, condescending laugh. "It is just a security measure. I travel so frequently that my bank flags large domestic purchases. Run it again." The courier tapped the card a second time. Another sharp negative beep echoed in the quiet foyer. "Declined again, sir." Bradley's confident smirk vanished. He snatched the card back, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He pulled a second card from his wallet, a personal platinum credit card, and shoved it at the terminal. The machine beeped immediately. Denied. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the entryway. Bradley frantically pulled his phone from his pocket, clearly intending to yell at a customer service representative. I watched from the archway as the screen illuminated his face. He stared at the display, his eyes widening in sudden raw panic. From my vantage point, I could clearly see the glaring red banner of an automated banking alert flashing across his lock screen. Apex Holdings corporate accounts frozen. Federal embezzlement probe initiated. All assets locked. Bradley stared at the text message, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. He looked up, his panicked gaze darting around the room, landing on the 30 executives who were now staring at him with undisguised contempt. He needed an explanation. He needed a scapegoat. And as he had done for our entire marriage, he immediately set his sights on me. Bradley stormed across the foyer and grabbed my wrist with bruising force, dragging me out of the archway and into the center of the room. "What is wrong with you, Clara?" Bradley roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Have you completely lost your mind? Did you forget to transfer the funds to the primary checking account again?" I stood perfectly still, letting him dig his own grave in front of the entire executive board. "This is exactly what happens when I let you handle the household budgeting," Bradley yelled, gesturing wildly at the courier. "You are completely incompetent. You bounce my cards over a simple wine delivery because you cannot manage basic arithmetic. I work 90-hour weeks to provide you with this luxury lifestyle, and you continuously embarrass me with your pathetic, disorganized domestic failures." His tirade was a perfect textbook display of his financial abuse. For years, Bradley had masked his own reckless spending and secret offshore transfers by screaming at me over missed bills and overdrawn accounts. He had conditioned me to believe that our financial strain was entirely my fault, convincing me that my logistic salary was meant to cover his extravagant lifestyle choices. He expected me to shrink away, to apologize profusely in front of his peers, to absorb the humiliation so he could maintain his flawless image. But I did not shrink. I simply looked at the chairman of the board, an older, stern-faced man named Richard, who was slowly taking his reading glasses off, while staring at Bradley in total disgust. They were not looking at my supposed domestic incompetence. They were looking at a man screaming at his wife while holding the exact corporate credit card he had just used to embezzle millions of dollars from their company. Bradley finally sensed the hostile, icy energy radiating from the board members. He swallowed hard, misinterpreting their silence as secondhand embarrassment over the declined card. "Excuse me for just a moment, gentlemen," Bradley muttered, his voice suddenly shaking. "A minor banking error. I need to make a phone call." He dropped my wrist and practically sprinted down the hallway, retreating toward the ground floor study. Sydney, whose glamorous facade had completely dissolved into an expression of sheer terror, immediately abandoned her post by the entryway and rushed down the hall after him. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, turned my back on the silent dining room, and walked calmly toward the kitchen. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a secure application. I had hidden a secondary baby monitor receiver in the study weeks ago, disguised as a sleek, modern smart speaker on the bookshelf. I tapped the screen, and the live audio feed connected instantly. Sydney's voice hissed through my phone speaker, shrill and vibrating with absolute panic. "Bradley, what the hell is going on?" Sydney demanded the sound of the study door slamming shut, echoing through the feed. The real estate agent just called me in a complete panic. She said the escrow account for the penthouse is completely locked. The funds are frozen. How am I supposed to pay the property taxes on our new condo if your accounts are shut down? You promised me that $2 million property was secure. You promised me that boring, frumpy wife of yours suspected nothing. I leaned against the kitchen wall, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face as I listened to the sound of his entire life burning to the ground. The live audio feed from the hidden baby monitor hissed with static as Sydney's panicked, ragged sobs echoed in the ground floor study. I pressed the power button on the receiver, letting the screen go black, and slipped the phone back into the pocket of my dress. The heavy oak doors of the kitchen swung open as I stepped out into a dining room that was rapidly emptying. The 30 corporate executives of tech innovations were not just leaving, they were fleeing. Men and women in expensive evening wear grabbed their coats in absolute silence, moving with a frantic, coordinated urgency. They deliberately avoided eye contact with anyone in the house. Richard, the chairman of the board, stood by the front door. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. He did not wait for Bradley to emerge from the study to offer an explanation or a goodbye. He simply turned on his heel and walked out into the crisp night air, followed closely by the remaining board members. Within 10 minutes, my meticulously cleaned house was eerily silent, abandoned by the very people Bradley had desperately intended to impress. The heavy mahogany door of the study finally clicked open. Bradley stepped into the hallway, his face pale and his bespoke tuxedo jacket slightly rumpled. Sydney was nowhere to be seen, likely having been ushered out the back patio door to avoid the immediate fallout. Bradley surveyed the empty dining room, his jaw clenching so tightly I could hear his teeth grind. He took a deep, shaky breath, visibly forcing his rigid shoulders to relax, and walked toward the living room where Beverly, Kimberly, and Andre were huddled together on the velvet sofa, looking entirely shaken. I followed him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral and my hands clasped loosely in front of me. Bradley stopped in front of the glass coffee table and looked directly at me. His arrogant, furious smirk was gone, replaced instantly by a chillingly calm, almost paternal expression. This was the pivot. This was the exact psychological maneuver he always deployed when he was backed into a corner and needed to twist reality to suit his narrative. "Clara, look at me," Bradley said, his voice dropping into a tone of condescending patience. "I know that scene in the foyer was stressful for you. You do not understand how corporate finance operates at this level, and that is entirely fine. What happened with the courier was simply a catastrophic bank error." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. "A bank error." "Exactly," he nodded, stepping closer and lowering his voice, as if speaking to a frightened child. "The corporate accounting software triggered an automated security freeze because of the massive international vendor payments we processed last week. It is a minor administrative glitch. The federal probe alert is just standard protocol for a corporate account of my size. It will be cleared up by Monday morning without an issue. But right now, we have an immediate cash flow bottleneck, and I need you to act like a supportive wife." He reached out, attempting to place a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I stepped back, letting his hand drop awkwardly to his side. "I need you to log into your personal banking portal right now," Bradley instructed, his tone hardening just a fraction when I rejected his touch. "You have an immaculate credit score because I have generously handled all of our major household debts. I need you to take out a $200,000 personal loan against your credit immediately. It will cover the immediate operational expenses and keep this family afloat over the weekend until the bank corrects their ridiculous mistake." I looked at the man I had married. He had just been caught red-handed funneling millions into offshore accounts and buying luxury real estate for his mistress, and his immediate reaction was to demand I plunge myself into massive, crippling debt to cover his tracks. "I am not taking out a personal loan for you, Bradley," I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of emotion. Kimberly scoffed loudly from the sofa, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at me. "God, Clara, you are always so completely useless in a crisis." You hoard your little paycheck and act like a martyr while Bradley carries the entire financial burden of this family. He just told you it is a bank error. For once in your miserable life, stop being a stingy, paranoid burden and do what your husband tells you to do. Andre stood up, puffing out his chest as he moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Bradley. Kimberly is exactly right, Clara. You are actively jeopardizing Bradley's promotion with your stubbornness. Real wealth requires leverage and sacrifice. If you cannot handle the pressure of being married to a top-tier executive, maybe you do not belong in this lifestyle. Bradley nodded, emboldened by their immediate support. You owe me this, Clara. I provide the roof over your head. I put the food on that table. If you refuse to support me when the bank makes a clerical error, then you are actively choosing to sabotage my career. Andre took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he pointed a finger at me. Let us be crystal clear about your position in this house, Clara. Bradley holds the primary deed. He pays the major bills. If you do not pull out your phone and secure that loan right now, we will pack your cheap clothes into a garbage bag and throw you and that crying baby out onto the street tonight. You will have absolutely nothing. I listened to Andre threaten to throw me and my newborn son out into the cold. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who was entirely dependent on my husband's stolen money to fund his fake offshore tech startup. They all believed Bradley's narrative. They truly believed I was a destitute, helpless woman who had married into their elite dynasty and was currently refusing to pay my dues. For years, they had ridiculed my sensible car and my lack of designer handbags, claiming my frugal aesthetic was a constant embarrassment to their high society image. They never realized my frugality was a direct result of Bradley systematically draining every dollar of my logistics salary to fund their country club memberships, lavish vacations, and offshore grifts. You are going to kick me out of my own home? I asked, my gaze shifting slowly from Andre to Bradley. It is my home. Clara Bradley snapped his facade of calm patience, completely shattering into jagged pieces. I am the one who built this life. I am the one steering this family toward real power. I gave you a simple instruction. Take out the loan, transfer the funds to my secondary account, and stay out of my way. If you cannot do that, then Andre is right. You serve absolutely no purpose to me anymore. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight. I will not give you a single dime, Bradley. There is no bank error. There is no administrative glitch. I am not ruining my credit score so you can continue to play a game you have already lost. The room fell dead silent. Kimberly's mouth dropped open. Andre stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. Nobody spoke to Bradley like that. Nobody challenged his absolute authority, especially not the quiet, compliant wife he had spent years emotionally grinding into the floor. Bradley's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged prominently against the stiff collar of his tuxedo shirt. He realized I was not going to break. He realized the obedient, terrified woman he thought he controlled was gone. Fine, Bradley snarled, his voice a vicious, venomous hiss. You want to play hardball. You want to act like you do not need me. He spun around, marched over to his leather briefcase resting near the entryway console, and viciously snapped the brass locks open. He dug his hand inside, pulling out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He marched back into the living room and violently hurled the envelope onto the glass coffee table. It hit the surface with a loud, sharp smack, sliding across the glass and stopping inches from my hands. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents spilling out of the unsealed flap. There are your consequences, Clara Bradley growled, his chest heaving as he glared down at me. Those are divorce papers. I had my lawyers draft them weeks ago because I knew you were too small-minded to ever keep up with me. You have exactly 24 hours to sign them and get out of my house, or I will destroy you in court and make sure you never see a single penny of my money again. Bradley stood over the glass coffee table, his chest heaving as his finger jabbed violently at the thick stack of legal documents he had just thrown down. The air in the living room felt thick and suffocating, charged with the toxic energy of a man desperately trying to regain control over a narrative that was rapidly slipping through his fingers. He had tried to force me into taking on a massive personal debt to save his sinking ship. I had refused. Now he was playing his final, most vicious card. Read the stipulations. Clara Bradley commanded, his voice dripping with absolute venom. His eyes were wide, manic, and completely devoid of the charming warmth he used to deceive the outside world. I had my legal team draft these weeks ago. I am demanding full legal and physical custody of Leo. You are going to sign away all of your parental rights tonight. Sydney is more than ready to step in and provide my son with the sophisticated, high-class maternal figure he actually deserves. He leaned closer, placing both hands flat on the glass table as he glared down at me. You are going to walk out of this house with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing. You will vacate the premises within 24 hours. You will leave the keys to the Maybach on the kitchen counter. You will not touch the joint investment accounts, you will not attempt to access the offshore savings, and you will leave every single piece of expensive jewelry I ever bought for you locked in the master bedroom safe. If you attempt to fight me on a single one of these terms, I will drag you through a legal battle so grueling it will break you. The sheer audacity of his demands was almost hypnotic. Bradley was a man currently standing in the center of a federal embezzlement probe. His corporate accounts were entirely frozen. His secret offshore funds were currently being flagged by international banking authorities. The Maybach he was so fiercely demanding I leave behind was a leased vehicle tied directly to a fraudulent corporate expense account that the FBI was undoubtedly already seizing. He was trying to strip me of assets that were actively evaporating into thin air. From the velvet sofa, Beverly let out a sharp, cruel laugh. It was a cold, grating sound that echoed perfectly with her son's delusion. She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress, and walked over to stand shoulder to shoulder with Bradley. Her face was twisted into a smug, triumphant sneer. You might want to pick up a pen and start signing, Clara Beverly advised, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. Let us be entirely realistic about your situation. You are a completely jobless woman. You have zero independent income, zero connections, and a well-documented history of severe postpartum depression. Do you honestly think any judge in a United States family court is going to side with you? Beverly took a slow sip from her wine glass, relishing every single word as she attempted to tear me down. The courts favor stability, Clara. They favor power, wealth, and proven success. Bradley is a top-tier executive at one of the most prestigious tech firms in the city. He is a titan of industry. You are an unstable, exhausted woman who could not even manage to bounce back after childbirth. The moment Bradley's lawyers present your medical records to a judge, they will laugh you right out of the courtroom. They will deem you an unfit mother before the first hearing is even over. Sign the papers, Clara. Take whatever scraps Bradley is generous enough to leave you and walk away before you completely embarrass yourself. Her words were a masterclass in gaslighting. Beverly and Bradley had spent the last year deliberately isolating me, weaponizing my sheer exhaustion against me. I had been working secretly to maintain my logistics empire while raising a newborn completely alone, while my husband spent his nights funding his mistress with stolen money. They had labeled my justified exhaustion as mental instability. They had convinced themselves that I was a weak, dependent burden who would crumble at the first sign of a legal threat. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I looked down at the thick manila envelope resting on the glass table. The bold black letters spelling out the petition for dissolution of marriage stared back at me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees and beg my husband to reconsider, to spare me, to let me keep my son. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, razor-sharp clarity. Signing this document under duress meant absolutely nothing in the eyes of the law. But to Bradley, my signature would be a white flag of surrender. It would give him a false sense of absolute victory. It would keep him blinded and arrogant for just a few hours longer, which was exactly the amount of time I needed for the federal authorities to finish tightening the noose around his neck. I reached forward and picked up the heavy silver pen resting next to the documents. Clara, do not be stupid, Andre muttered from the background, crossing his arms. Just do what he says. I ignored him. I pulled the papers from the envelope, flipped directly to the final signature page, and clicked the pen open. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the sharp, scratchy glide of the metal tip against the thick paper. I signed my name with smooth, unhesitating strokes. I initialed the custody waivers. I initialed the asset forfeiture clauses. I signed away the house I secretly owned, the car that was about to be repossessed, and the bank accounts that no longer existed. I placed the pen gently back onto the glass table. I did not shed a single tear. Bradley stared at the signed documents, a slow, incredibly arrogant smirk spreading across his face. He let out a breath, his shoulders dropping as he looked at his mother in total triumph. "See," Bradley chuckled, shaking his head. "I told you she would fold. She always does." I turned around without a word and walked up the sweeping grand staircase. I moved with calm, deliberate purpose. I entered the nursery where Leo was sleeping peacefully in his crib, entirely oblivious to the chaos below. I gently scooped my son into my arms, wrapped him in his warm blue blanket, and grabbed the small diaper bag I had packed days ago in preparation for this exact moment. When I walked back down the stairs holding my baby, Bradley was still standing by the coffee table, holding the signed divorce papers like a trophy. His smirk widened as he saw me heading for the front door. "I gave you 24 hours, Clara," Bradley called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I suppose it is better you leave tonight. Leave the Maybach keys on the console." I stopped with my hand resting on the heavy brass handle of the front door. I turned my head, looking over my shoulder at the man who thought he had just destroyed my life. I met his arrogant, mocking gaze, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. "You better check the mail at 9 a.m. tomorrow," I whispered, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet foyer. Before Bradley's smirk could falter, before Beverly could open her mouth to issue one final insult, I pushed the heavy door open, stepped out into the cool night air with my son, and walked away from the wreckage. The heavy oak door of the house clicked shut behind me, instantly severing the shouting and the toxic chaos of the life I was leaving behind. The night air was sharp and bracing against my skin. I held Leo close to my chest, his warm weight a grounding force as I walked down the driveway. I did not glance back at the leased Maybach resting in the garage, nor did I look at the expansive property Bradley wrongly believed he controlled. At the curb, an unmarked black SUV was already waiting, the engine idling quietly in the shadows. The driver, a trusted security detail my family had employed for decades, stepped out immediately and opened the rear door. I climbed inside, securing Leo in the pristine car seat that had been prepared for him. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, I left the illusion of Clara, the helpless dependent wife, completely behind in the dust. The drive to the downtown Four Seasons was a blur of passing streetlights and quiet reflection. We bypassed the main lobby entirely. The driver escorted me through a private underground entrance to a secured elevator, swiping a keycard that took us straight to the penthouse floor. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a scene that was the absolute antithesis of the frantic, disorganized panic I had just escaped. The penthouse suite had been transformed into a high-stakes corporate war room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Seattle skyline, casting a sleek metropolitan glow over the room. 4 elite corporate lawyers from my family's private firm were stationed around a massive mahogany dining table. Their laptops were open and perfectly organized stacks of illuminated documents covered the surface. There was no yelling, no frantic posturing, only the quiet, lethal efficiency of professionals preparing to dismantle a man's life. Standing at the head of the table was Richard. The very same Richard who just an hour prior had stood in my foyer as the stern-faced chairman of the Board of Tech Innovations, watching Bradley humiliate himself over a declined credit card. But he was not just the chairman, he was my father. He turned as I entered, the rigid, unyielding mask of a corporate titan, softening instantly into deep paternal relief when he saw Leo and me. He crossed the room in quick strides, pulling me into a fierce, protective embrace. "I am so sorry you had to endure that repulsive display," my father murmured, his voice thick with suppressed rage as he stepped back to look at me. "Watching that parasite scream at you in your own home took every ounce of restraint I possessed. I wanted to tear him apart right there in the foyer." "You played your part perfectly, Dad," I replied, offering him a steady, genuine smile as I handed him his sleeping grandson. If you had intervened or broken character, he would have known the truth. He needed to feel completely invincible, so he would sign his own death warrant. My father guided me to a plush velvet armchair, signaling for one of his aides to bring me a hot cup of tea. He sat opposite me, gently rocking Leo, and shook his head with a heavy, regretful sigh. 3 years. Clara, my father said, his tone laced with disbelief. You spent 3 years living in that scaled-down reality. Working a mid-level logistics job, hiding your trust fund, pretending to be a perfectly ordinary struggling woman just to see if he loved you. I looked down into my teacup, the reflection of the city lights shimmering on the dark liquid. I needed to know, I stated firmly, my voice devoid of any regret. Growing up surrounded by the immense wealth of the tech innovations empire, every friend, every suitor, every connection came with a calculated ulterior motive. I wanted a marriage built on absolute authenticity. I wanted a man who valued Clara the person, not Clara the billionaire heiress. I gave Bradley a blank slate. I gave him a loyal wife, a beautiful son, and a modest but stable life. And he chose to despise me for it. My father leaned forward, his eyes turning cold and sharp like cut glass. He did not just despise you. He actively used the mid-level corporate position I secretly arranged for him to rob our company blind. He used your supposed financial ignorance as a smokescreen to funnel our corporate treasury into offshore shell companies for his mistress. The absolute arrogance to think he could outsmart me to outsmart you while living under a roof you legally owned. The ultimate betrayal was no longer the theft itself. It was the absolute contempt Bradley held for the woman he thought I was. He had mocked my postpartum struggles. He had allowed his mother to degrade me in my own kitchen. He had stood by while his parasitic friends threatened to throw me onto the street. He had handed me divorce papers to secure his false freedom, completely unaware that he had just handed me the ultimate legal leverage to ruin him. I set the teacup down and stood up, the last remnants of the timid, accommodating wife vanishing forever. I walked over to the mahogany table, looking down at the lead attorney, a ruthless, brilliant litigator named Marcus. "Where do we stand, Marcus?" I asked, my voice ringing with executive authority. Marcus adjusted his glasses, sliding 3 separate, meticulously prepared folders across the polished wood toward me. "Everything is locked and loaded, Ms. Preston. The divorce papers he so graciously pre-signed have been countersigned. Because he eagerly waived all rights to your assets in his rush to leave you with nothing, he has legally forfeited any claim to the estate. We file the moment the courthouse opens." Marcus tapped the first folder with his pen. "Here is the formal eviction notice. Since the deed to the property is held under a blind trust controlled by your family office, Bradley Beverly and their guests are currently trespassing. The sheriff's department is scheduled to arrive at the property at exactly 9 a.m. to physically remove them from the premises." My father stepped up beside me, tapping the second folder. "Here are his corporate termination papers. His employment contract with Tech Innovations is null and void due to gross financial misconduct. He is stripped of all stock options, all health benefits, and his corporate pension. He leaves with absolutely zero severance." Marcus moved his hand to the third and thickest folder, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. "And finally, the criminal element. Our forensic accountants have mapped every single unauthorized transfer. We have the complete digital trail connecting Bradley's corporate card to Sydney's offshore accounts. More importantly, we found the secondary ledger. It seems his friend Andre was not just running a fake tech startup. He was actively running a sophisticated money laundering operation to wash Bradley's stolen funds. We have compiled the evidence into an undeniable federal-level package." I looked at the folders, feeling the immense, crushing weight of the trap we had just set. "And the authorities. The tip-off is drafted and ready for submission to the FBI field office." Marcus confirmed, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. "We hit send at 8:55 a.m. By the time Bradley walks down the driveway to check the morning mail, the federal agents will be pulling up to the curb." Marcus tapped the enter key with a definitive, sharp strike. The digital clock on the war room wall flipped to 8:55 in the morning. The encrypted email containing the undeniable financial evidence, the offshore routing numbers, and Andre's secondary money laundering ledger was officially in the hands of the federal authorities. My father gestured to one of the junior aides. The large flat-screen monitor mounted on the far wall of the penthouse suite flickered to life. I had integrated a comprehensive smart home security system into the property months ago, a system Bradley believed he controlled, but which was actually registered to my private administrative account. The screen split into a grid of crystal-clear high-definition live feeds covering the driveway, the foyer, and the kitchen. The 8:58 a.m. feed from the kitchen showed a scene of absolute sickening arrogance. Bradley was leaning against the marble island sipping a freshly pulled espresso. He wore a crisp tailored suit, clearly preparing for what he assumed would be a triumphant morning of straightening out a minor banking glitch. Beverly sat on a high stool swirling a mimosa in her glass, a picture of smug satisfaction. Andre and Kimberly were casually picking at a lavish spread of imported pastries and fresh fruit that I had stocked in the pantry just 2 days prior. She actually thought she could leverage the baby against me. Bradley scoffed, his voice transmitting perfectly through the hidden audio receivers. He checked his gold watch. The moment my accounts unlock at 9, I am having Richard file the emergency custody injunction. I will have the police drag her back here by noon. She walked out with absolutely nothing. No money, no car, no resources. I completely broke her. Beverly laughed, that same grating superior sound she had weaponized against me for years. You handled it perfectly, darling. I told you from the beginning she was a weak, unsophisticated little mouse. It is a relief she is finally out of this house. Now Sydney can move her things in, and we can finally upgrade the interior decor to something that actually reflects our status. Andre nodded, taking a bite of a croissant. You really had us sweating last night with that card decline, man. But you played her like a fiddle. The house, the assets, keeping the offshore accounts completely under the radar. You are a genius, Bradley. I watched the monitor, my face completely impassive as the digital clock on the screen ticked to exactly 9 o'clock. The heavy, resounding boom of a fist hammering against the solid oak front door echoed through the house. It was not the polite, rhythmic knock of a mail courier or a neighbor. It was the aggressive, authoritative pounding of law enforcement demanding immediate entry. On the kitchen feed, Bradley's arrogant smile widened into a self-satisfied grin. Right on time, he announced, setting his espresso cup down. That must be the bank's courier with the expedited replacement cards. I told you, a minor glitch. He adjusted his tie, walked out of the kitchen, and strutted down the hallway toward the foyer. The camera angle shifted, tracking his movement perfectly. Bradley reached the door, grabbed the brass handle, and pulled it open with a grand, expectant flourish. His smug expression instantly evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed, paralyzed shock. Standing on the front porch was not a bank courier. It was a wall of heavy tactical vests, gold badges, and grim faces. 4 armed county sheriff deputies stood on the steps. Behind them, flanked by 2 severe-looking IRS agents, was a junior partner from my father's legal firm, holding a sleek leather briefcase. 2 dark federal vehicles were parked diagonally across the manicured lawn, blocking the driveway completely. Bradley Wilson, the lead sheriff deputy, barked, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Bradley stumbled backward, his hands flying up in a frantic, placating gesture. There has been a mistake, Bradley stammered, his voice jumping up an octave. You have the wrong house. I am a top-tier senior executive at Tech Innovations. I demand to know who authorized this. You cannot just show up at the private residence of a corporate vice president like this. The junior lawyer from my father's firm stepped forward, smoothly bypassing the deputies. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single, heavily embossed piece of corporate stationery. Not anymore, Mr. Wilson, the lawyer stated, his voice ringing with cold, professional detachment. He shoved the document directly into Bradley's chest. Bradley fumbled to catch it, his eyes scanning the bold black text. It was the termination letter. It outlined his immediate permanent removal from Tech Innovations, citing gross financial misconduct, corporate embezzlement, and the immediate revocation of all stock options and benefits. Bradley stared at the paper, all the blood draining from his face, until he looked like a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry wheezing sound came out. In the background, the commotion had drawn the rest of the parasites from the kitchen. Beverly, Kimberly, and Andre hurried into the foyer. Andre took one look at the IRS agents on the porch, his eyes widening in sheer terror. He immediately turned on his heel and sprinted toward the back patio door. Two federal agents waiting in the backyard intercepted him instantly, tackling him onto the pristine patio stones and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists before he could even scream. The money laundering tip-off had worked flawlessly. Kimberly let out a shrill, hysterical shriek, dropping her mimosa glass onto the hardwood floor, where it shattered into 100 pieces. Beverly, entirely blinded by her own delusion and completely failing to grasp the severity of the situation, pushed past her frozen son. She puffed out her chest, glaring at the sheriff with absolute aristocratic outrage. "How dare you barge into our home?" Beverly shrieked, her voice echoing in the grand entryway. "I do not care who you are. This is a multi-million-dollar private estate. You have no right to terrorize my family. I want all of you off my property immediately, or I will have your badges." The sheriff did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply pulled a thick, legally binding document from his clipboard and thrust it directly into Beverly's shaking hands. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, his tone heavy with absolute finality. "You do not own this property. You are currently trespassing on a private estate, exclusively owned and managed by Apex Holdings, LLC. You and everyone inside this structure have exactly 10 minutes to vacate the premises, or you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." The heavy silence in the grand foyer was broken only by the sharp rustle of the legal document in Beverly's trembling hands. She stared at the eviction notice, her perfectly manicured fingernails biting into the thick paper. Her aristocratic facade, cultivated over decades of looking down on everyone around her, began to violently crack. "That is an absolute lie!" Bradley roared, his voice cracking as he lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at the sheriff. "This is my house. I bought this property. My name is on the deed. You are holding fraudulent documents. I am going to have your badge for this. I am going to sue this entire county into the ground." Marcus, the lead attorney from my father's firm, stepped smoothly in front of the sheriff. He adjusted his glasses with agonizing precision, projecting the calm, lethal energy of a predator who had just cornered its prey. He unclasped his sleek leather briefcase and extracted a heavy certified document bearing the raised gold seal of the county clerk. "Actually, Mr. Wilson, you do not own a single square inch of this estate," Marcus stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Your name has not been on the deed for exactly 36 months. Bradley froze. The manic, aggressive energy drained from his body, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his eyes darting between Marcus and the certified deed. "I pay the mortgage." "You stopped paying the mortgage 3 years ago," Bradley Marcus corrected, his tone cold and clinical. 3 years ago, you secretly funneled $200,000 from your escrow account into a catastrophic cryptocurrency venture. You hid the late notices. You ignored the warnings. The bank officially initiated foreclosure proceedings against you. You were exactly 14 days away from total public bankruptcy and the complete loss of this property. Bradley's jaw dropped. A sickly pale shade washed over his face. He remembered the panic from 3 years ago. He remembered the sleepless nights, the frantic phone calls, and the sudden miraculous day when the bank simply stopped calling. He had convinced himself that his aggressive accounting tricks had somehow confused the bank's system, buying him enough time to sweep his failure under the rug. He had genuinely believed he was a financial genius who had outsmarted the system. "My client, Clara Preston, was fully aware of your gross financial negligence from the very beginning," Marcus continued, letting the brutal truth sink in. "She watched you lie to her face about your finances. But to protect her son's home and to prevent a public scandal that would have destroyed your corporate career before you ever made vice president, she quietly intervened. She purchased your distressed debt in its entirety, paid off the mortgage in full, and transferred the sole ownership of the property to her private holding company, Apex Holdings, LLC. Beverly let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest as she looked around the opulent foyer of the mansion she had proudly paraded in front of her high society friends. "She owns the house," Beverly whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. "She paid for it." 100% Marcus confirmed, not breaking eye contact with Bradley. "You have been living here as a guest, Bradley. A guest whose invitation has just been permanently revoked." "You lied to me," Beverly shrieked suddenly, turning her fury onto her own son. "You told me you bought this house outright. You told me Clara contributed absolutely nothing to this marriage. You told me she was a penniless burden. I have been hosting charity galas in a house owned by that woman." Bradley was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving as his reality collapsed. He looked wildly around the room, desperate for any lifeline. "This is marital property," he shouted, his voice shrill with panic. "We are married. I have rights to half of her assets. She cannot just kick me out." Marcus offered a slow, predatory smile. He reached into his briefcase one final time, pulling out the thick manila envelope Bradley had thrown at me the night before. "You might have had a claim," Marcus said softly, "if you had not explicitly demanded my client sign these dissolution papers 12 hours ago." Marcus flipped the document open, tapping the signature line where Bradley had so aggressively forced me to sign away my rights. "By demanding Clara sign this specific post-nuptial agreement, you legally mandated that both parties forfeit any and all claims to the other's independent businesses, trusts, and LLCs." Marcus explained, twisting the knife. "You were so desperate to ensure Clara could not touch your bank accounts that you legally severed your own claim to a $10 million estate. You outsmarted yourself, Bradley." The poetic justice hung heavy in the air. Bradley had built a cage to trap me with absolutely nothing, only to realize he had locked himself inside it. Standing near the kitchen archway, Kimberly had watched the entire exchange in stunned silence. She looked at Bradley, absorbing the reality that the wealthy, powerful executive she had attached herself to was now officially jobless, completely broke, and being evicted from his own home. "You do not even have a job," Kimberly muttered, her voice dripping with sudden intense disgust. "You are completely broke." "Kimberly, wait," Bradley pleaded, reaching a hand out toward his mistress. "I can fix this. I still have the offshore accounts." Kimberly did not wait. She turned on her heel, grabbed her expensive designer coat from the hall closet, and sprinted out the front door, pushing past the IRS agents without a single backward glance. She was abandoning a sinking ship. While the chaos consumed the foyer, Andre had quietly backed away. The moment Marcus mentioned forensic accountants and corporate embezzlement, Andre knew the walls were closing in. His fake tech startup was the primary laundering vehicle for Bradley's stolen funds. If Bradley was going down the financial trail, led directly to Andre's front door. Sweat beaded on Andre's forehead. He slipped unnoticed through the kitchen, abandoning his breakfast on the marble island. His heart pounded against his ribs like a jackhammer. He just needed to get to his car. He just needed to get to the airport and out of the country before the authorities dug any deeper. He crept through the dining room, keeping his head down as he reached the heavy sliding glass doors that opened out onto the expansive backyard patio. He unlocked the latch with shaking fingers and slid the glass door open, feeling a brief rush of fresh morning air. He stepped out onto the patio, breaking into a brisk jog toward the side gate. He did not make it 3 steps. 3 high. 2 large men in dark tactical windbreakers stepped out from behind the stone pillars of the outdoor kitchen, blocking his path entirely. Their hands rested firmly on their holstered weapons. Andre Vance, the taller agent, asked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. Andre froze, his hands slowly raising into the air as the remaining color drained from his face. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the agent announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for federal money laundering and wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The heavy glass of the patio doors rattled violently in their frames as the 2 federal agents shoved Andre Vance back into the grand foyer. His custom-tailored Italian suit was now dusted with dirt from the patio stones, and his perfectly styled hair hung wildly across his forehead, plastered to his skin by a cold sweat. The smooth, untouchable arrogance that had defined his entire existence had evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a pale, trembling man who finally realized he was entirely out of exits. Agent Miller, the taller of the two FBI operatives, tightened his iron grip on Andre's arm, forcing him to stand upright in the center of the entryway. The agent extended his free hand, his palm flat and expectant. "Hand over the keys to the Maybach, Mr. Vance." Agent Miller demanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that echoed off the high ceilings. "We know it is parked in the front drive, and we are impounding it as evidence of illicit financial activities." Andre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He plastered on a desperate, greasy smile, attempting to summon the charismatic grifter persona that had kept him afloat for years. "There is a massive misunderstanding here," Officer Andre stammered, patting his empty pockets defensively as he tried to back away. "That vehicle is a corporate asset. It is a company car registered to my tech startup, Nexus Solutions. I am the chief executive officer. I use it strictly for client acquisitions and executive transport. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to seize legitimate corporate property without a specific warrant targeting my business." Marcus, the lead attorney from my father's firm, who had been quietly watching the pathetic display from beside the front door, let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He stepped forward, the heels of his leather shoes clicking sharply against the imported tile, projecting the lethal energy of a man holding all the cards. He reached into his sleek briefcase and withdrew a single piece of heavy cardstock. "You are not a chief executive officer," Andre Marcus stated, his voice ringing with absolute clinical precision. "You are an unemployed fraud with a staggering amount of credit card debt and zero verifiable income for the past 48 months. Marcus held up the document so the federal agents could see it clearly. It was the official state vehicle registration bearing the raised seal of the Department of Motor Vehicles. "This is the registration for the black Maybach currently sitting in the driveway." Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto Andre's terrified face. "It is not leased to Nexus Solutions. It is not registered under your name. The vehicle was purchased outright in a single cash transaction and titled directly to Apex Holdings LLC. The blood drained completely from Andre's face. Bradley, who was still paralyzed by his own impending eviction, whipped his head around, his eyes wide with horrified realization. "You see," Bradley Marcus said, pivoting his lethal attention toward my soon-to-be ex-husband. "You thought you were incredibly clever. You embezzled millions from tech innovations and funneled it directly into Andre's fake startup, believing you were building an untraceable offshore nest egg. Andre then took those stolen funds and lived like a king. He bought designer clothes, booked luxury vacations, and purchased a $300,000 vehicle to maintain the illusion of a highly successful entrepreneur. But your friend Andre is not very bright." Marcus took a slow, deliberate step toward the two men, savoring the absolute destruction of their pathetic scheme. "He used a third-party broker to acquire the car," Marcus explained, his voice dropping to a dangerous, mocking register. "That broker immediately flagged the highly suspicious cash transaction and required a legitimate corporate guarantor to finalize the title. That broker contacted the Central Family Office. Clara intercepted the paperwork. She authorized the purchase, but she legally structured it so that Apex Holdings absorbed the title." The silence in the foyer was deafening. Bradley's chest heaved as the catastrophic reality crashed down on him. "You used stolen money to buy a car that Clara owns?" Marcus summarized brutally. "You have been driving her vehicle, parking it in her driveway, drinking her wine and insulting her to her face, all while plotting to help her husband steal her family's wealth. She watched you parade around in a luxury car that belonged to her company, just waiting for the perfect moment to drop the hammer." Andre began to hyperventilate. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting toward the front door, but the path was completely blocked by armed deputies and federal agents. He took a frantic step backward, but Agent Miller was faster. The agent yanked Andre's arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the foyer, sealing Andre's fate. "Andre Vance, You are under arrest for grand theft, auto possession of stolen property, and conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, Agent Miller announced, his voice devoid of any sympathy. You have the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you use, considering you just confessed to operating a vehicle you do not own. As the agents forcefully marched Andre out the front door and down the sprawling driveway, Kimberly completely lost her mind. The realization that she had tethered her life to a penniless criminal shattered her fragile gold-digging reality. She had abandoned Bradley to chase the supposedly wealthier tech CEO, only to discover she was standing in the middle of a federal crime scene with absolutely nothing to her name. The lifestyle she had plotted and manipulated to secure was entirely fabricated, funded by stolen money that was currently being seized by the government. Kimberly let out a shrill, hysterical scream. She clawed at her own hair, her expensive designer handbag dropping to the floor, its contents spilling across the hardwood as she rushed out onto the front porch. She watched in sheer, unadulterated panic as the federal agent slammed Andre against the sleek black hood of the Maybach, patting him down roughly before shoving him into the back of an unmarked black SUV. Her shrieks pierced the quiet morning air, a chaotic, desperate symphony of ruined ambitions and shattered delusions. She stamped her feet, screaming Andre's name as the federal vehicle's doors slammed shut, trapping him inside. Bradley remained completely frozen in the entryway, his mouth hanging open as he stared out at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the mansion's massive front windows. He watched his best friend get hauled away in handcuffs, finally realizing that the woman he had spent years underestimating had just masterfully orchestrated his absolute and total destruction. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles cast harsh, strobing shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn. Bradley remained completely frozen on the front porch, staring at the empty space where his best friend and his getaway vehicle had just been. The reality of his total financial ruin was still crashing over him when the screech of tires tore through the quiet suburban morning. A sleek silver rideshare sedan aggressively swerved around the parked police cruisers, tires jumping the curb before slamming to a halt at the edge of the driveway. The rear door flew open and Sydney stormed out. The woman Bradley had proudly declared as the sophisticated, high-class maternal figure his son deserved looked absolutely unhinged. Her designer trench coat was thrown hastily over a silk slip dress. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was dragging a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase behind her. She marched directly up the driveway, completely ignoring the armed county sheriffs, the IRS agents, and the shattered remnants of Bradley's life scattered across the foyer. "Bradley, what the hell is going on?" Sydney shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer panic as she dragged her heavy suitcase up the porch steps. She shoved past the lead IRS agent without a second glance. I went down to the lobby for a coffee, and when I came back up, my keycard was declined. The building manager deactivated the elevators to the penthouse. He told me the biometric locks were changed and handed me a federal seizure notice. Bradley reached out his hands, shaking violently as he tried to grab her shoulders to silence her. "Sydney, stop talking. You cannot be here right now. Look around. Keep your voice down." Sydney violently swatted his hands away, her eyes wide and manic. "I will not keep my voice down. You told me that condo was paid for. You told me the deed was secure. The concierge just told me the property has been seized by the federal government. Fix this right now, Bradley. Call your bank and fix this." Before Bradley could formulate a single lie to placate her, the low, powerful hum of a massive engine drew everyone's attention back to the street. A custom armored black Escalade glided smoothly to a stop behind the federal vehicles. The tinted rear door swung open and I stepped out onto the pavement. Beverly, who had been leaning weakly against the doorframe, let out a sharp gasp. Bradley's jaw visibly dropped. I was no longer the exhausted, emotionally broken woman they had mocked and degraded in the living room 12 hours prior. I wore an impeccable midnight blue designer power suit with razor-sharp tailoring. My posture was absolute, radiating the quiet, lethal authority of a woman who completely owned the ground she walked on. I walked up the driveway with measured, unhurried steps, flanked by two private security contractors who seamlessly parted the perimeter of law enforcement agents to let me pass. I stopped at the base of the porch stairs, looking up at the pathetic crumbling assembly of people who had tried to destroy me. Bradley cannot call his bank. Sydney, I stated, my voice echoing with calm, crystal-clear precision. His corporate accounts were permanently frozen at midnight. And even if they were active, he does not own your beautiful penthouse. He never did. Sydney whipped her head around to look at me, her eyes darting aggressively over my designer suit and the security detail standing behind me. She looked back at Bradley, utterly confused. Who the hell is this? What is she talking about? I am the woman who actually paid for your luxury lifestyle, I replied, taking a slow step up the porch stairs. Did Bradley tell you he was a brilliant investor, Sydney? Did he tell you he built his wealth from the ground up, making incredibly savvy real estate decisions? I did not wait for her to answer. I kept my eyes locked directly on hers, systematically dismantling the glamorous illusion she had bought into. Bradley did not build anything. He is a mid-level executive who spent the last 3 years siphoning capital from my family's tech empire. He used my corporate routing numbers to pay for your marble countertops, your imported Italian furniture, and the massive down payment on that financial district condo. I spent months meticulously auditing the secondary ledgers while he thought I was drowning in postpartum depression. Which means your luxury penthouse was purchased entirely with stolen corporate funds. Sydney's face drained of all color. She took a slow, stumbling step away from Bradley as if he had suddenly caught fire. As I am sure the federal agent standing right next to you can confirm, I continued gesturing smoothly to the IRS officials observing the exchange. The government tends to frown upon real estate acquired through corporate embezzlement and money laundering. I provided the FBI with the exact paper trail linking the stolen funds to your property address. I authorized the seizure order myself. That is why your locks were changed at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. You set me up! Bradley screamed, the veins in his neck bulging as he launched himself toward the edge of the stairs. He was instantly blocked by the heavy arm of a sheriff's deputy who shoved him firmly back against the brick facade of the house. You orchestrated all of this. You planned this entire morning just to ruin me. I did not plan your greed, Bradley. I simply documented it, I corrected coldly. Bradley turned desperately back to his mistress, his hands raised in a frantic, pleading gesture. Sydney, listen to me. Do not listen to a word she says. I still have the offshore accounts. Andre set up the shell companies in the Caymans. The money is safe there. We can leave. We can fly out tonight and start over. I offered a slow, pitying smile. The accounts in the Cayman Islands, I asked softly. The ones hidden behind the dummy tech startup. I handed the decryption keys and the complete routing history to the FBI field office exactly 20 minutes ago. Those accounts do not exist anymore, Bradley. You have absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of the total devastation finally crushed whatever fight Bradley had left in him. He slumped against the brick wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the porch floor, staring blankly at the concrete. Sydney looked down at the man she had planned to build a glamorous future with. Then she looked at the grim-faced federal agents surrounding the property. The brutal reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. She was standing on an active crime scene holding luggage packed with items bought with stolen federal funds heavily implicated in a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Absolute ruthless self-preservation kicked in instantly. Sydney ripped her designer handbag off her shoulder and threw it violently at Bradley's head. The heavy leather buckle smacked sharply against his jaw, but he was too catatonic to even flinch. Do not you ever speak to me again, Sydney shrieked, her voice echoing down the entire suburban street. You lied to me. You told me the money was clean. You told me to sign those property transfer papers because it was a tax write-off. She spun around, completely turning her back on Bradley, and marched directly up to Agent Miller, throwing her hands out in desperate surrender. I have text messages, Sydney screamed, pointing frantically back at Bradley. I have emails. I have his secondary laptop hidden inside my suitcase right now. He forced me to sign those documents. I will give you everything you need to lock him up for the rest of his life. I want full immunity, and I am testifying against him. The federal agents immediately separated Sydney from Bradley, escorting her toward a dark government vehicle to record her formal statement and secure her cooperation. Bradley remained slumped against the cold brick of the porch, utterly broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant executive he had been just an hour ago. I watched the scene unfold with absolute detachment. The frantic energy in the driveway was suddenly pierced by a new sound. It was the sharp, heavy clicking of heels against the pavement. Kimberly had recovered from her initial shock of seeing Andre shoved into the back of an FBI cruiser. The reality of his arrest had finally penetrated her thick layer of entitlement. She sprinted back up the driveway, her face smeared with ruined makeup, her breathing shallow and erratic. She completely ignored her brother Bradley sitting on the porch and lunged directly toward me. My security contractors instantly stepped forward, forming a solid physical wall between us, but I raised a single hand, signaling them to stand down. I wanted to hear exactly what the golden child of the Wilson family had to say. "Clara, please," Kimberly gasped, her voice trembling as she pressed her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "You have to stop this. You have to tell them to let Andre go. This is a massive mistake. He did not know where the money was coming from. Bradley manipulated him. Bradley lied to both of us. You cannot let them take him away. We are family, Clara. Please, for the sake of our family, drop these ridiculous charges." I looked at her, my expression completely unchanged. I let the word hang in the crisp morning air, allowing its sheer absurdity to echo between us. "Family," I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that made Kimberly physically flinch. "You want to invoke the concept of family right now to save a man who helped your brother steal millions of dollars?" "Yes," Kimberly sobbed, reaching out as if to touch my arm, though she wisely stopped short of actually making contact. "We are sisters, Clara. We are supposed to protect each other. You know I have always loved you. You know I have always been on your side." I did not raise my voice, but the sheer force of my anger seemed to lower the ambient temperature on the porch. "I distinctly remember a very different version of our sisterhood, Kimberly," I stated, stepping forward and forcing her to retreat a step. "I remember sitting on your pristine white sectional sofa exactly 5 days after I gave birth to my son. I was physically broken. I was bleeding. I was drowning in severe postpartum depression, and I came to you for help because I thought just for a second that the women in this family might actually support each other." Kimberly shook her head frantically, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "Clara, do not do this. I was stressed that day. I did not mean anything I said." I ignored her pathetic attempt to backpedal. "I remember exactly what you told me." I continued enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "You looked at me over the rim of your designer sunglasses and called me a pathetic hormonal burden. You laughed in my face. You told me that Bradley was a visionary who deserved a woman who actually contributed to society, not a lazy incubator who was draining his hard-earned resources. You told me to stop playing the victim and get over it, or Bradley would eventually find someone better." Kimberly covered her mouth, a fresh wave of panicked tears spilling over her cheeks. "That was a joke," she stammered, her voice high and breathless. "I was just trying to give you tough love. It was just a joke between sisters." "It was not a joke," I corrected coldly. "It was a calculated attempt to break my spirit so you and your mother could maintain absolute control over Bradley and his supposed wealth. You thought I was weak. You thought I was stupid. You thought I would just sit quietly while your boyfriend funded your lavish lifestyle with money stolen directly from my son's future. Family does not exploit family, Kimberly. Family does not fund fraudulent tech startups to buy limited edition handbags." I took a step back, signaling the definitive end of the conversation. "I am not your sister, and I am certainly not dropping the charges. Please," Kimberly shrieked, dropping to her knees on the hard concrete of the driveway. "I have nothing. Andre has everything in his name. If he goes to prison, I will lose my house. I will lose everything. I do not even have a job." As she sobbed on the ground, a new figure stepped forward from the cluster of law enforcement vehicles. It was the lead IRS investigator, a tall, serious woman holding a thick clipboard and a specialized evidence scanner. She was flanked by 2 armed agents carrying large plastic evidence bags. Miss Wilson, the IRS investigator, said, her tone entirely devoid of emotion. Please stand up. Kimberly scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at the approaching agents. What do you want? She demanded, attempting to summon a fraction of her usual aristocratic arrogance to mask her panic. I have not done anything wrong. My boyfriend is the one you arrested. I am just an innocent bystander. The investigator flipped a page on her clipboard, running a pen down a long, detailed financial ledger. According to the financial records we just seized from Nexus Solutions, you are substantially more than a bystander, the investigator stated. Andre Vance used embezzled corporate funds to purchase hundreds of thousands of dollars in luxury goods, which were then transferred directly to you. These items are legally considered the fruits of a federal crime and are therefore subject to immediate government seizure. Kimberly froze, her breath hitching in her throat. What are you talking about? The investigator pointed her pen directly at Kimberly's wrist. The Cartier diamond watch you are currently wearing was purchased on June 12th using a wire transfer from a known money laundering account. The emerald-cut diamond earrings you have on were bought at a private auction in September, funded by the exact same account. And that crocodile skin Birkin bag you dropped on the porch was acquired through a shell company registered to Mr. Vance. No. Kimberly shrieked, taking a frantic step backward and clutching her wrist defensively. These are gifts. You cannot take my personal property. These belong to me. They belong to the federal government, the investigator corrected sharply. Remove the watch and the earrings immediately. One of the armed agents stepped forward, snapping open a heavy plastic evidence bag with a loud, intimidating rustle. Kimberly began to hyperventilate. She looked wildly at her mother, Beverly, who was still standing by the front door, paralyzed by shock. Mom, do something! Kimberly screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. Tell them they cannot take my things. Tell them who we are. Beverly did not move. She simply stared at her daughter, completely powerless as the illusion of their untouchable wealth shattered into pieces right before her eyes. I need the jewelry now, Miss Wilson, the agent demanded, stepping closer and extending the open plastic bag. If you refuse to comply with a federal seizure order, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and placed in the back of the transport vehicle with Mr. Vance. Kimberly let out a guttural, heartbroken wail. With shaking, manic fingers, she unclasped the $50,000 watch from her wrist and dropped it into the plastic bag. She reached up, sobbing violently, as she unfastened the diamond earrings, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped them on the pavement. The agent sealed the bag with a sharp zip, then walked over to the porch, scooping up the discarded Birkin bag and tagging it with an official evidence sticker. We will be at your primary residence later this afternoon to collect the rest of the assets listed on this ledger. The investigator added coldly. I strongly suggest you do not attempt to hide or sell any designer items before we arrive. Kimberly collapsed against the side of a parked police cruiser, sobbing hysterically as she watched her entire identity being hauled away in plastic evidence bags. Kimberly's hysterical sobs faded into the background as the brutal reality of the morning finally pierced Beverly's aristocratic delusion. The federal agents were systematically dismantling her children's lives, but the eviction notice in her own trembling hand signaled a much more immediate, devastating catastrophe. She had no husband to bail her out, no personal wealth, and as of 10 minutes from now, no home. Beverly's perfectly manicured facade completely disintegrated. She dropped the eviction notice on the pristine hardwood floor and stumbled down the porch steps. Her designer heels scraped harshly against the concrete driveway as her knees abruptly buckled. Beverly collapsed directly at my feet, her hands desperately grasping at the hem of my midnight blue trousers. Clara, please, Beverly gasped, her voice stripped of its usual haughty cadence and replaced by a raw, pathetic wheeze. You cannot do this. I am an old woman. I have nowhere to go. Bradley promised me I would always have a place in this house. You have a massive estate here. Just let me stay in the south guest wing. I will not be any trouble. I can help you with baby Leo. I will be the perfect grandmother to him, I swear it. I stared down at the woman who had made it her daily mission to torture me since the day Bradley and I got married. There was no pity in my chest, only the cold, sharp satisfaction of absolute justice. "Do not ever mention my son's name again," I stated, my voice slicing through the crisp morning air with freezing precision. Beverly flinched, shrinking back but keeping her hands raised in pathetic supplication. "Clara, I am family. You cannot just throw family onto the street like trash." I stepped back, forcing her to release my suit. "You made your definition of family incredibly clear exactly 6 months ago." I reminded her, projecting my voice so it carried directly to Bradley, who was still slumped in catatonic shock against the brick wall. "You hosted that lavish charity dinner for the hospital board right here in my dining room. You deliberately sent the catering staff home 3 hours early. And when your prestigious guests moved to the parlor for brandy, you handed me a dirty sponge." Beverly's eyes widened in sheer horror as the memory vividly resurfaced. "You stood in front of the mayor's wife and told me to start scrubbing the crystal because I needed to earn my keep." I recited, perfectly matching the exact cruel, condescending tone she had weaponized that night. "You laughed and called me a freeloader who contributed absolutely nothing to your son's empire. You told me the kitchen was the only place a penniless burden belonged. But I did not know." Beverly sobbed violently, black mascara running down her cheeks and ruining her expensive makeup. "I did not know you owned the house. I thought Bradley paid for everything. I thought you were just using him." "Ignorance does not excuse cruelty, Beverly. It just exposes your true character," I replied, my expression carved from absolute stone. "You did not exploit me because you thought I was poor. You exploited me because you thought you could." I reached into the pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the small, worn piece of laminated plastic I had kept exactly for this moment. It was the same expired city bus pass Bradley had thrown directly at my chest a week ago, when he gleefully declared he was freezing my bank account, stripping me of my vehicle, and forcing me onto the streets with absolutely nothing. I pulled the bus pass out and dropped it. It fluttered down, landing perfectly on the concrete, right between Beverly's trembling hands. Beverly stared at the piece of plastic as if it were a highly venomous snake. She looked up at me, her chest heaving with sheer, unadulterated panic. "What is this, Clara? I do not know how to use public transit. I cannot carry my luggage on a bus. I am a woman of status." "Your 10 minutes are up," I announced, turning my back on her and gesturing sharply to the county sheriffs waiting by the front door. "Try the bus, Beverly. I hear it builds character." The sharp crack of crumbling paper broke the silence in the driveway. Bradley pushed himself off the brick wall, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled inside his tailored jacket. He pulled out the crisp manila folder containing the expedited divorce papers he had thrown at my chest just yesterday. He stumbled forward, ignoring his mother sobbing on the ground, and dropped to his knees right beside her. He held the folder out to me, tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning his carefully crafted alpha male persona. "Clara, look." Bradley choked out, his voice cracking with desperate manufactured agony. "I have not filed them yet. We can tear them up right now. We can fix this. I will go to counseling. We can go to couples therapy. I will do whatever it takes to put our family back together. Just tell them to let me go. I am still your husband." I looked down at the pathetic man I had once thought was my partner. "Couples counseling." I repeated the words, tasting like ash. "You want to fix our marriage now that your offshore accounts are seized and your mistress just offered to testify against you for federal immunity." I was confused, he pleaded, reaching out to grasp the hem of my trousers. "The stress of the start-up, the baby. I made a terrible mistake. But I love you. We have a son." I stepped back, ensuring his hands grasped nothing but empty air. "You did not make a mistake, Bradley. You made a daily calculated choice. I knew about Sydney 6 months ago. I found the banking receipts for her penthouse while I was packing my hospital bags for my delivery." Bradley froze, the tears instantly drying in his eyes as the color drained completely from his face. I sat in the maternity ward holding our newborn son, completely aware that you were texting your mistress from the hospital cafeteria. I continued, ensuring my voice carried so the federal agents and his mother heard every single word. I waited. I gave you 6 solid months to look at your child and decide to be a father. I gave you every opportunity to step away from the embezzlement, cancel the penthouse, and choose your family. But you chose the Italian marble. You chose the designer lifestyle. You chose to drain my family corporate accounts to fund a lie. Clara, please, Bradley begged, shaking his head frantically and waving the manila folder. The papers. We can just tear them up. We still share marital assets. I am entitled to half. We can negotiate. A sleek black town car pulled into the driveway, gliding to a halt directly behind my Escalade. The rear door opened and Marcus, my lead corporate attorney, stepped out. He adjusted his glasses and walked directly up the porch steps, holding a duplicate of the folder Bradley was clutching. Actually, Mr. Vance, Marcus stated, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority, tearing up those documents will not change your current predicament. The expedited separation agreement you forced my client to sign yesterday contained several highly specific riders. Bradley looked from Marcus to me, sheer panic returning to his eyes. What riders? They were standard dissolution forms. I printed them myself. You were so eager to throw your wife onto the street that you failed to have your own legal counsel review the final draft she handed back to you, Marcus corrected, pulling a highlighted document from his folder. Page 14, Section 4, explicitly states that in the event of admitted or proven financial fraud against Clara's family corporation, you unconditionally surrender all claims to any shared marital assets, properties, and spousal support. You signed and notarized a full confession to embezzlement masked as a property transfer. Bradley stared at his own copy of the papers, furiously flipping to page 14. His eyes scanned the dense legal text he had blindly initialed in his rush to ruin me. The folder slipped from his trembling hands, hitting the concrete. He slumped forward, his forehead nearly touching the pavement, completely defeated. Right on cue, a massive white moving truck turned the corner and backed slowly into the driveway, its backup alarm beeping steadily. A crew of 6 professional movers jumped out, carrying heavy-duty industrial garbage bags and reinforced cardboard boxes. "Your 10 minutes expired," I told Beverly, who was still kneeling on the concrete, staring blankly at the bus pass. The movers bypassed the frozen family members and marched directly into the house. Within minutes, the front door swung open again. The movers began tossing black plastic trash bags onto the curb. They were filled with Bradley's custom suits, Kimberly's remaining fast fashion clothes, and Beverly's outdated wardrobe. There were no designer suitcases, no careful packing. Just the bare minimum necessities allowed by the asset seizure order piled unceremoniously next to a storm drain. "You cannot do this in broad daylight!" Beverly shrieked, scrambling to her feet, as a bag containing her shoes hit the pavement with a loud thud. "The neighbors are watching." Beverly was entirely correct. The flashing lights and the commotion had drawn out the residents of the exclusive suburban cul-de-sac. Doors opened and people stepped out onto their manicured lawns. I recognized Mrs. Gable from next door and the Pattersons from across the street. For the past year, Beverly had held court at neighborhood association meetings, feeding these exact people a fabricated narrative. She had painted me as an unfit, hysterical mother who refused to work, claiming Bradley was a saint for putting up with my postpartum breakdowns while graciously allowing a freeloader to live in his home. Now Mrs. Gable and the Pattersons stood silently on the sidewalks, watching as federal agents clamped heavy steel handcuffs onto Bradley's wrists. They watched as the IRS investigator formally read Kimberly her rights regarding possession of stolen federal assets. They watched the mighty, arrogant Wilson family being reduced to 3 criminals forced to stand next to trash bags on the curb. Bradley was yanked to his feet by a deputy. He did not fight. He simply hung his head, unable to meet the eyes of the neighbors he had desperately tried to impress. "Watch your head," the deputy ordered sharply, shoving Bradley into the back of the cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut with a metallic finality that echoed down the quiet street. Kimberly followed shortly after, weeping loudly as she was loaded into a separate transport vehicle. Beverly was left standing entirely alone on the curb, clutching the expired bus pass, staring blankly at the black garbage bags containing her entire life, while the neighborhood gossips she had armed with lies witnessed her ultimate destruction. The federal convoy began to pull away, their sirens silenced, but their lights still flashing against the morning sun. I stood on my porch, my security detail falling in beside me, breathing in the clean, untainted air of my property. Before I could turn to head back inside and officially reclaim my home, a low, powerful engine hum resonated from the end of the street. A gleaming midnight black Maybach glided smoothly down the cul-de-sac. Its tinted windows and flawless exterior reflected the morning light like polished obsidian. The vehicle bypassed the departing police cruisers with effortless grace and pulled to a silent halt directly at my curb, right next to Beverly and her trash bags. The engine purred perfectly as the rear passenger door slowly began to open. A tall man impeccably dressed in a tailored black chauffeur suit stepped out from the driver's side and walked briskly around the rear of the vehicle. With a gloved hand, he pulled the heavy armored door wide open. Inside the cabin, bathed in soft ambient lighting and the rich, intoxicating scent of new leather, sat a top-tier luxury infant car seat. Baby Leo was strapped in securely wearing a pristine cashmere sweater, happily playing with a small plush toy. He was completely insulated from the toxic devastation occurring on the pavement outside. Two highly trained private security guards sat in the opposite-facing jump seats, watching the perimeter with eagle-eyed focus. Seeing the sheer magnitude of Clara's hidden wealth, seeing his infant son surrounded by an elite lifestyle he could never legitimately afford, shattered the very last fragment of Bradley's sanity. As the federal deputy attempted to guide him toward the transport vehicle, Bradley physically snapped. He lunged violently toward the Maybach, his heavy steel handcuffs clinking sharply as he strained against the deputy's iron grip. The sudden movement caught the attention of every single neighbor standing on their lawns. Mrs. Gable gasped, covering her mouth, while Mr. Patterson shook his head in absolute disgust. Clara Bradley screamed, his voice tearing from his throat in a raw, animalistic howl of pure desperation. "Clara, look at me. That is my son. You cannot take my son away from me. Please. I am begging you, give me one last chance. I will do anything. I will plead guilty to everything. I will tell them it was all my fault. I will scrub floors for you. Just let me see him. Let me be a father. Let." The federal deputy forcefully yanked Bradley backward by the collar of his ruined suit, dragging him away from the vehicle. The neighbors watched in absolute breathless silence as the neighborhood golden boy degraded himself, sobbing and fighting like a caged animal in the middle of the street. Clara stepped smoothly into the spacious rear cabin of the Maybach. She settled into the plush seat right next to her son. Leo reached out with a tiny, chubby hand, and she gently caught his fingers, offering him a warm, reassuring smile. The overwhelming love she felt for her child stood in stark contrast to the absolute zero she felt for the man screaming her name outside. Her expression turned back to stone. She pressed a silver button on the door console. The thick tinted window rolled down with a quiet mechanical hum. She looked out at the pathetic, crumbling assembly of people who had spent an entire year trying to break her mind and steal her future. She looked at Kimberly, who was sobbing hysterically in the back of a separate police cruiser, stripped of her stolen diamonds and her fake prestige. She looked at Beverly, kneeling on the hard concrete next to a pile of black garbage bags, clutching an expired city bus pass with nowhere to go. And finally, she locked eyes with Bradley, who was hyperventilating, his face stained with snot and tears, as the deputy forced him toward the transport van. "You told me I was holding you back," Clara stated, her voice projecting with calm, lethal authority over the idling engine of the luxury vehicle. "I remember the night you stood in my kitchen, wearing a suit paid for with my family's money, and told me that my postpartum depression was suffocating your ambition. You demanded a post-nuptial agreement because you claimed you were a self-made titan. You looked me right in the eyes and said you needed complete financial independence from a wife who contributed nothing to your glorious empire." Bradley shook his head frantically, fresh tears spilling over his cheeks, his knees scraping against the asphalt as he tried to drop to the ground in supplication. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Clara, please, do not leave me like this." Clara leaned slightly toward the open window, her face a mask of beautiful, terrifying apathy. She delivered the final crushing blow with surgical precision. "You wanted independence, Bradley. Enjoy it." She did not wait for his response. She pressed the silver button again, and the heavy tinted window glided up, sealing the cabin shut and severing her connection to the Wilson family forever. The acoustic glass immediately muted Bradley's agonized wails, reducing his pathetic existence to nothing more than a silent movie playing outside her window. The chauffeur slid back into the driver's seat and shifted the car into gear. The Maybach pulled away from the curb, smoothly gliding down the suburban street like a silent phantom. Through the rearview mirror, Clara watched the scene fade away. She watched the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminating the morning sky. She watched the federal agents formally arrest her ex-husband, shoving his head down as they forced him into the back of the transport van. She watched the movers toss the very last trash bag onto the pile next to Beverly, leaving the matriarch of the Wilson family utterly alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the judgmental stares of the neighbors she had lied to for years. The cul-de-sac disappeared as the Maybach turned onto the main avenue, leaving the wreckage behind. Clara let out a long, slow breath. The heavy, suffocating weight of the past year completely lifted from her shoulders. She looked down at baby Leo, who was cooing happily, perfectly safe, and deeply loved. He would never know the toxic manipulation of the family they'd just left behind. He would grow up surrounded by truth, stability, and the unbreakable protection of a mother who proved she would burn the world down to secure his future. She leaned her head back against the soft leather headrest, pulling out her secure smartphone. She opened her primary banking application, the one hidden behind layers of biometric encryption. The screen illuminated, displaying a net worth that eclipsed anything Bradley or his greedy family could have ever comprehended. Clara Sterling was no longer a tired, abused housewife, begging for scraps of affection in a house built on lies. She had returned to her true life. She was a powerful, independent billionaire, a ruthless protector of her bloodline, and a woman who had masterfully executed the sweetest, most absolute revenge.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.